All right, let's start with the obvious one. Dillon Gabriel has to play well, or Oregon does not win the football game. Because when Dillon Gabriel doesn't play well, see Michigan State a week ago, he has a tendency, apparently, to turn the football over in the red zone. This Ohio State defense is too good. If you throw a pick in the red zone, not likely you're going to get those points back. Because Ohio State's defense isn't going to let you march up and down the field like Michigan State's was a week ago. So, yeah, Dillon Gabriel has to be the best version of himself. And I think this game has all the kind of big game cliches that you can imagine. Because I do think these teams are incredibly evenly matched. And I'll talk about that more with Jay Stevens of Locked On Buckeyes on tomorrow's show. If you want to argue Oregon's got the better roster, Ohio State's got the better roster, at the very least, what I hope we can all agree on, there is no Grand Canyon-sized gap between these two rosters. The composite talent rankings would tell you that, and I think the eyeball test would tell you that as well. So it can come down to something as simple or as often repeated as which quarterback plays better, or who doesn't turn the ball over as much, or who has the ball last, or who executes on special teams, or who has fewer penalties. You could put any of those things in there. And that can apply to this football game, because when a game is decided by less than 10 points, well, that's typically what it comes down to. I think this ends up being a one-possession game. If it is a two-score game, it's one of those where a team is up 7, running out the clock, they kick a field goal, they're up by 10, and the other team can't go get a garbage time touchdown with, 90 seconds left or whatever. Like, I can see that happening. I think this will be a one-score game. But Dillon Gabriel's the first guy. Second guy, this is an or. Depending on where guys line up, I haven't done a snap-by-snap count of where everybody lines up for Ohio State's defensive line, which means I know basically nothing about the Buckeyes, of course. A Johnny Cornelius or Josh Connerly. One of these guys. If you watch last week's game against Iowa, which I saw a good chunk of, mostly in the second half, Ohio State's defense changed the tide completely. Iowa's defense was keeping the Buckeyes in check for a half. Why did Ohio State's offense get better in the second? They had better field position. Why? Ohio State was forcing turnovers. Why? Defensive line is disruptive. This is the best defensive line that Oregon has faced all season. I don't know that it's particularly close. The sack numbers, the rushing numbers, they've been really good in the last 3 games for the Ducks. Oregon State, UCLA, and Michigan State. But in this game against Ohio State, they have to be at their absolute best. And that starts with your NFL caliber offensive tackles. Either one on a given play could be the most singularly important player, because if you want this Oregon receiving core, which is great, to have an opportunity to get down the field, create explosives, Gabriel's got to have time to throw. And it's going to be a tall task against JTT and Jack Sawyer and the boys. So that's a player with an or, number 2. Number 3, Jeff Bassa. I've talked about Jeff Bassa a lot on this show. Why? Because he's a 4th-year starter. He is Oregon's captain on defense. He is the play caller. He is the leader. He is the guy that, if you ran a defense through a player, that Oregon's defense would run through. It's literally where the signals go from the sideline or the play calls now that they've got the communication in the headset. But everything Ohio State does starts with running the football. And if Oregon's defensive line plays well, there are still going to be opportunities or necessary plays for Jeff Bassa to make and the linebackers to keep the running game contained. Got to be solid. I don't think he needs to, go have 1.5 or 2 sacks or, have an interception or pass breakup. No, in the run game, Jeff Bassa's got to lead the charge, and they've got to be able to contain Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson as best they can. So those are the 3 Ducks that I think are most important. Couple of mailbag questions here and more coming up later on today's show. So make sure that you continue to send in your questions via YouTube comments, X, formerly known as Twitter, or you become a Locked On Ducks insider. You get priority access. You get all sorts of other perks as well. You can get a free 14-day trial. That link in the description below. This from Moody Man. What's up, Spencer? Question for the pod. Kind of a 2-parter. Do you feel like Dillon Gabriel is almost focusing too much at times on Tez, who is Bo Nix's brother, by the way? I didn't know that. Especially on 3rd downs. And what do you make on Stewart's production on offense? I think he's extremely skilled, but his performance has been underwhelming from what I expected. Can't wait for Saturday. Go Ducks. So I'll start with the Tez Johnson question. I do not feel like Dillon Gabriel is forcing the ball to Tez Johnson. Because in key situations like 3rd down or 4th down, I don't feel like he looks at Tez and only Tez. If Tez has a matchup that he likes. Anytime Will Stein gets Tez Johnson on the linebacker, there's nowhere else Dillon Gabriel should look. I don't care what linebacker, and Brock Heward and Jason Benetti were making this point on Friday night against Michigan State. I don't care what linebacker you put out there. There's not a linebacker in the country that's going to regularly be able to cover Tez Johnson, if at all. Like 9 times out of 10, he's going to beat him on whatever route he runs. He's too quick, too shifty, too good of a route runner. So I don't feel like, even though he's Oregon's leading receiver, I don't think it's a function of Gabriel forcing the ball to Tez Johnson. Like I can't think of a plethora of throws where, it feels like he threw the ball there and it's like, hey, he had this guy open over there and he didn't make the right read. Like, what I've liked about Dillon Gabriel's plays, the way he's facilitating the ball and going with what the defense gives him or where the ball should be going and looking where he should be looking. So, no, I don't think he's throwing to Tez too much. Evan Stewart definitely came in, and from a talent standpoint, a lot of Oregon fans, myself included, looked at him and said, yeah, that's a pretty one-to-one replacement for Troy Franklin. I still feel that way. Like, he led Oregon in receiving against Boise State. That's what he's capable of, being that downfield threat. Oregon just hasn't been able to quite sync up the timing on some of the deep shots, and it hasn't quite been there all the time. But I talked about Evan Stewart creating explosives for Oregon's offense going into the Michigan State game, and they tried to take those shots. They're not going to be there every single time. Remember, Bo Nix threw to Troy Franklin in 2022 and 23. Gabriel and Stewart have played 5 football games together. So can I see him having a stronger second half of the season, maybe starting this week if Ohio State is shading coverage towards Tez Johnson? And this is why you need a deep receiving core, of course. Like, you don't want to have one guy and only one guy, or only 2 guys even, that the defense feels can hurt you in a variety of ways. But we know Trayshawn Holden can create explosives, and we know Evan Stewart can, and we know Tez Johnson can. That makes it pretty tough for any secondary in the country to cover. So I don't think that his numbers have been as high as a lot of people might have been expecting. I don't think it means that the passing game has been lacking in a significant way. I think it goes back to what I mentioned just a moment ago, that Gabriel is not as locked into him because he doesn't have that history or that rapport, and he's just formed it faster with Tez Johnson than he has with Stewart or Trayshawn Holden. And I think, he goes T-Ferg plenty as well. As the year progresses, you could see him have a bigger year. But at the very least, Evan Stewart is still a really important player, because having the threat of going over the top or taking a safety away, and that's where 2 DBs are, and that leaves a 1v1 for Tez Johnson or Trayshawn Holden or T-Ferg, that's still an important aspect of a passing attack. And Ohio State's got that too. They've got 3 guys that they feel really good about, and the top 2 are, probably the names the best. Smith and Ibuka are both really, really good. Smith's one-handed catches, like, he is going to be crazy good, and he already is. It's hard to make an impact as a true freshman. Even as a wide receiver, he's certainly doing that. But when I watch him, I think he is more than just the one-handed catches. Most people know, he makes one-handed grabs, which he does, and it's spectacularly good. But I think he is truly a complete wide receiver, and Oregon secondary is going to get a big-time test from him this week. So that's that question. Duck of the Desert, I presume Arizona area, maybe, possibly, has a couple of questions here. Does Noah Whittington need to be better to take the load off Jordan James? And does more than one tight end need to get used in the first half? So I'm going to go to the second question first. Did you notice how little Kenyon Sadiq was involved in the offense last week compared to prior weeks? Caught my eye. Not that he, wasn't ever on the field, but did it feel like there was a concerted effort to have a couple plays for him, like a tunnel screen or anything of that nature, pop pass and whatnot? Wouldn't be surprised if Will Stein busts that out against Ohio State. So that's the first point. To the second point, I don't think Noah Whittington's drop in his average yards per carry relative to what he's capable of is due to him not playing well. This is definitely an RB1, RB2 situation. I thought coming into the year it might be more 1A, 1B with James and Whittington. It's clearly not nor do I think that it should be. James has been phenomenal. It is hard for a running back to find a consistent group. It's like bringing a 3-point specialist off the bench. If he's not in the game early, it's hard for him to be in that sort of rhythm. And running backs, it's a hot hand situation. Not just your ability to run through tackles, but your ability to see the field, to read the hole, and understand where you're going to go, and also to have a variety of run concepts. How many different styles of run does Jordan James have in a game compared to Noah Whittington? Feels like for James they're more complex because he's getting more touches, whereas Whittington, he's in there to give James a spell, and they don't run anything too overly complicated. But I don't think there's anything wrong with Noah Whittington. I think being a backup running back sometimes is just tough. Is Jordan James better? Yes. That much has become abundantly clear. Would I love to see Whittington have a good game? Sure. But Jordan James has demonstrated he's capable of being the number one go-to guy throughout the course of a game, and I don't expect that to change.